Hi there, my name is Sherman Oberson and welcome to my Tiki room. Today I'm going to show you how to sculpt this Tiki mug using my favorite clay to sculpt with, Super Sculpey Medium. Let's get started. So today we're going to make this Tiki mug, and to start off I want to talk about the tools that we'll be using and the clay that I'm using and the form that it's built on. So let's move the mug out of our way and start by talking about the clay. This is Super Sculpey Medium. It's my favorite clay for sculpting. It's got great workability. I'm not a very quick sculptor, and I can leave a piece in process overnight on my workstation, and when I come back in the morning the clay is perfectly workable. But it's firm enough that it doesn't really take fingerprints incredibly well, but you can get really good detail on it. And so it comes in 1-pound packages in gray, and that's the clay that we're going to be using. And tools that we'll be using. This is a 5-in-1 tool that Sculpey puts out, and it's got 2 rubber tip tools and a ball tool and a needle tool and a little blade. And they all fit onto this handle like that, and they lock in, and it's a really useful tool. I'm going to be using that. And then another tool that I'll be definitely using is these, which these are called Etch and Pearl, and they come in a set of 3. This is what the package looks like, and they are incredibly useful for a couple of different things. They have this cool little concave dot on the bottom that we can use for a couple of different things, and then of course they have a really nice sharp point that we can use as a needle tool, and that's those. And the other tool that we'll need is an X-Acto knife, and then here's another needle tool just in case I want to vary the size. And these are ball stylus tools, and they're pretty useful for a couple of different things. And this is another rubber tip tool, again in a different size. I like to have a variety of sizes when I'm sculpting. And this tool is actually designed by Christy Friesen. She's a well-known polymer clay artist. And this is called the Wow I'm Awesome tool, and it's got a sharp side on one and a curved side on the other. And I'll be using that as well. And then optional, but makes it a little easier, is a circle cutter, and that's to cut the base of our glass. So speaking of glass, I'm doing this on a glass form, and the reason I'm doing it on a glass form is a couple of things. It eliminates me needing to use an armature, so that's really cool, and it makes it that this can hold liquids really well because polymer clay is porous to a degree, and that way we can actually fill this with a nice tropical drink and drink out of it in the end. It's also really great because you can get it, of course, in a million different sizes, so you can make it work perfectly for your project. The other thing is that the clay really likes to stick to glass. It loves sticking to glass, so it makes it very easy for you to do any sculpting on top of it. And then lastly, for the back of our piece, I've used some of these little oval cutters and a cutter that is shaped like a seashell, and you could probably do this by hand, but having the cutter makes it a little quicker and easier. So let's get started. The way that the clay comes is it's 1 pound, and you'll see that they've already put it into these little sheets that are perforated, and that allows you to pull them off, but it also fits perfectly into your pasta machine. And I'm going to run one of these. What I tend to do in the beginning of a project is I will run the entire box through. We might not use the entire box, but it's good to have it in case. And then that way the clay is perfectly conditioned and ready to go. So I'm going to set my pasta machine to my thickest setting, and I'm going to roll one of these sheets through. And then once it's through the first time, I'm going to fold it over, making sure that the fold side goes into the pasta machine first, and then I will run it through again, And I'm going to do that a total of 3 times, and that will eliminate all the lines that were there from the packaging and give me a sheet of clay that's completely ready to go. So we'll need one of these to do the bottom of our glass, and then I took another one of these, and after running it through on the thickest setting, I ran it through on a number 4, and that's going to wrap around the glass itself. So let's start with that. So in order to get it to go on the glass, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up with the bottom of the glass, and I'm just going to smooth it, and then I'm going to take my X-Acto blade, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a smooth line there. And it doesn't matter if it's perfectly straight or not, we just need there to be a line there to make it easy for when we get around all the way around the glass. Now I'm not worried so much about making it to the top of the glass because we're going to trim that anyway, but I want the bottom of the glass to have the clay extending over a little bit. And we'll trim that and then apply a bottom to it. So I'm just going to wrap it around, and as I'm going, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not creating air pockets, and you can see if there's air bubbles there. You'll see them as you go, and I'm not worried if this is perfectly straight on top because again we're going to trim that, and we can always add clay up there if we need to. But I'm just going, and as I go I'm just smoothing using my thumb, and that is eliminating as many of these air bubbles. We'll still get a couple, but it's going to take out most of them. Alright, when I get up, you can see I didn't line up perfectly, and that's okay. I'm just going to get it to come up here, and I'll just patch that. Perfect. And this doesn't really matter because we're going to do so much to the glass that all of that will be covered up anyway. Okay. Now you can see where the clay butts up against the other piece, and I want to try to get that blade to go right up against where that butts up. And it's hard to do it perfectly, but you can get close if you're lucky. Like that. And I'm a little over, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the excess from underneath and smooth this back down. And you can see I'm using my thumb just to smooth the seam. And don't worry about hiding that seam, because what we can do is we can sculpt our tiki right on top of that seam, and it will completely hide it by the time that we're done. So you don't have to go nuts about making this absolutely perfect at this point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just roll this around and try to get out any air pockets that I can see. And the easiest way to do that is to take your X-Acto blade and just cut a little hole, and then just run your finger over it, and the air will escape out. So here obviously we messed up the clay a little bit, so I'm just going to trim that off. And the top of our tiki is going to have a little rough finish in anyway, so it won't really matter. But that eliminates that clay that was kind of messy. Alright, whoop, I got a big air pocket right here. So I'm going to create 2 little holes, and you'll see just by pushing it through, the air kind of resists, but you just kind of work it out until you see it lay flat. If it's still a little bubbled, add another cut there until you get all of that air out. Air is our enemy when we're working with polymer clay. It's not like traditional pottery where a piece will blow up in your oven, but you will get a bubble there that will be unsightly. So it's a lot easier to use than pottery in that regard. Okay, so now I have all this excess clay on the bottom, and I'm just going to tuck it under, and I'm going to make it lay flat, and then I'm going to take my X-Acto blade and I'm going to lay it up against the glass, flat up against the glass, and then just rotate the cup in my hand, and I'm getting rid of all of that excess. And now I'm just going to make sure that this is adhered and that there isn't any air bubbles there. Now don't worry if you missed any air bubbles, because as you're sculpting you'll find them and you'll be able to eliminate them. Okay, now we have the glass wrapped. So our next step is to create the bottom. So one thing I could do if I didn't have a round cutter is I could just put this up against the glass and then take my blade and trim all around it. But having the cutter is great, and in this case I want the cutter to be bigger than the glass anyway. I think I actually might go one size smaller than this. And so here's that size. And I'm actually going to cut out 2 of those to create our bottom. And when I press it into the clay, I rotate it just to make sure that the cutter has gone all the way through. And then I'll lift away any excess and I'll set that to the side. And now I have these 2 discs, and I'm just going to stack them one on top of the other. And I'm not worried if they're not absolutely perfect, because we're about to attach it, so we're going to be fussing with it anyway. Okay, so here's our bottom, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line it up with our clay piece, and I'm going to attach it by pressing, and I'm trying to again make sure that there isn't any air trapped there. And now what I'm going to do is use my thumb, and a lot when I'm attaching a piece to the clay body, a lot of times I will use my thumb in like a sweeping motion like that, and it's sort of like dragging the clay down. And I'll do that all the way around, and don't worry if it doesn't look perfect yet, because we're going to go back and smooth it after. Right now we're concerned with just getting this piece attached. We're not so much worried about how it looks yet, because again we're going to add so much on top of this. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way around, and if I wasn't doing this for you guys on video, I would probably go a little slower than this and take my time, but I'm trying to do it as quick as possible for you guys. Okay, so once we're all the way around, then I'll go back and I will smooth that seam with my finger. Your fingers really are your best tools. They are very good at getting the clay to become completely smooth. And what the tool really is just an extension of your fingers. And as I'm going, you'll see I'm spotting all these little air pockets, and that only happens in the beginning. Okay. Now I'm just going to smooth, smooth, and rotate. And so a lot of times with the sculpting, I'm using one hand to rotate the piece, and my other hand is doing the smoothing action. And I'm a lefty, so that's why my left hand is doing it. Okay. Pretty good. Okay, now we'll place that down, and we're going to put it to the side. And then our next step is we're going to create this little lip that you see along the base of the piece. So to get that, I'm going to create a snake of clay, and then I'm going to smooth it out. And I do this all by my hands. You might find it easier to do it with a roller, but for me, I like doing it this way because I can really very easily control the size. And so I'm just, with one hand I'm pulling with this hand, and then with this hand I'm actually smushing the clay into a smaller shape. And by doing that, I can very quickly get it into a rough shape that's half the size that it was, double the length and half the size. I can also roll it on my board, and you'll notice when I'm rolling it that I'm not using my fingers at all. I'm only using my palm. If you use your fingers, of course, you're going to get marks. And also remember to take any rings that you wear off before you do this. I tend to forget and end up leaving marks all over the clay until I realize that that's what's making those marks. Okay, so now here is my snake, and it's still too big, so I'm just going to make it a little smaller. And you can see I'm just, as I said, pulling with one hand and then using my thumb and forefinger to squeeze the clay a little smaller, and that makes it go a lot quicker. Okay. That's much longer than we're going to need, so I'm going to first off trim the one end like that, and then I'm going to eliminate some of this because that's probably more than long enough. Okay. So now I'm going to attach this to the base just by running it along the lip of the bottom of the glass, like so. And then when I get to the part where it butts up, I'm just going to have it come right over and use my X-Acto to go in there and make a cut straight down. And now I have the piece attached. So now this is only loosely attached, and that won't make it any easier for us. So first thing that we want to do is eliminate the seam where the snake joined itself. And I'm just doing that with my fingers. And then what we want to do is take our rubber smoothing tool, and we want to come, and again, it's kind of hard for me to show it in the angle that I'm just brushing the clay over to make sure that it's sealed all the way around. And I'll do that all the way around. And because it's the bottom of our glass, I don't worry about it being 100% smooth, but if it's going to bother you that it's there like that, you can spend a little more time than I'm doing smoothing this and getting it absolutely perfect. Okay. I'm just going around, and again using one hand to rotate the glass and the other hand to do the smoothing. And it also helps to have your finger hold the little snake of clay exactly where you want it, and it's attached. Okay, so now I'm just going to go and make sure that that's exactly how I like it. And the reason we're putting this little lip on the bottom is so that the Tiki can actually rest on there. He's pretty three-dimensional and he sticks out a bunch, and having that lip there is where we're going to attach his feet first. So the feet are the next step. So for most of the pieces on our Tiki, they're either going to start as a snake or a little ball, and with all of sculpting, if you can break it down into simple shapes, it makes it easier for you to do it. So I am getting a ball of clay. Now I just tend to eyeball these, but if it really bugs you, you can actually start out with like maybe a circle cutter and cut out 2 circles the exact same size. But for me, I just eyeball it, and I don't mind if they're off a little bit. And sometimes once I've created the shape that I want, I might, modify it a little bit, add a little clay or subtract a little clay, and that's how I like to work. Okay. So now we have our ball shape, and to make it into his foot, I'm going to take that ball shape and using my thumb and forefinger, I'm going to hold it, and then my other thumb and forefinger, I'm going to flatten it. And then what I'm doing now is I'm pushing on the bottom, and that's going to create a half circle. And then what we want to do is to create his big toe, I'm going to just go in there and actually use my thumb and forefinger to make it rounded, and that's his little big toe. And then I'm just going to stretch this out, and these are going to be his other 4 toes. Now once we have one to the size that we like, and there really isn't a right size or a wrong size, it's depending on how big you want his feet to be, the only trick is that you want to try to make the other one match. So I'm going to use that as my reference, and I'm going to do the same thing. The only thing that we want to make sure is that we put the big toe on the opposite side that we did the other foot. That way they match each other. So there's his big toe being formed. And then we'll work on the other toes. Okay. Then once I have the general shape, what I'll do is I'll put them back to back and I'll see, oh, this one's not as long, so I'll make that a little longer, and then I'll hold it up to the top and make sure that the thickness matches so that they match up. And again, they're not perfect, but they match up pretty well. Now that we have our feet matching, the next step is to give them some other toes. We have that big toe, so I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to just put in a little line there, and then I'm going to look and sort of see what is the middle of our piece there, and that's going to be a spot for one toe. And then I'm going to go in the middle again, and now he's got 4 toes, but we want to give him more than that. And now he's got 5 toes altogether. And so now what I'm going to do, now that I've given him that little line, is I'll come in with the needle tool and I'll just put a little fine line on the top to sort of suggest a wrinkle. Okay, and we've done that. And then I will go in and I will give him toenails, again using my needle tool, and I'm just going to roughly go in there and give him a set of toenails. Okay. Now he's got all of his little toenails on, and the foot is ready to be attached. So now remember, I said we're going to try to cover up that seam, so there's our seam. So I'm going to put one toe, or I said one foot, on one side of that seam, and then to smooth it down, I'm going to take a rubber tip tool and I'm going to just come in, and I'm not worried about the sides of it so much, I just want to get where it's going to join up with his leg smoothed down. And so I use the rubber tool in the same motion that we attached the other piece, and I'm just coming in there, and then with my hand I'm going back in and smoothing it. And now we have his foot attached, and we're going to go to his other foot, and I'll very quickly give him toes again. And 3, 5, and then we're going to go in and give him his little toenails. And these toenails don't have to match up, and some of them, if we wanted to really add a little bit of character, we could get a little fine line in them, like they're cracked, like that. Okay, now we're going to just put that on the opposite side of his other, of that seam. We're going to leave a little bit of a space in between, and we are going to attach that the same way. And then we'll start worrying about his legs, because that's the next step. We're building his body from the ground up. And I tend to do that with my figures when they have a full body, is start at the feet and work my way up. Okay. There, now the feet are attached. And I'm not so worried. This is just to make sure that this is attached. We're not going to see that seam, so don't, make it too crazy. We just want to make sure it's attached. Okay, now for his legs, we're going to need 2 shapes like this. So how I got that shape is I started with a ball of clay, and then I took that ball of clay and I began to round the top of it with my fingers. And I'm just pushing down to get that shape, tapering it on the bottom. And then I'm taking my thumb and my forefinger and I'm pushing down with my thumb while holding my forefinger flat. And that is going to make the back of our piece flat. And what that's doing is it's making it dome on the edge here and creating a flat spot on the back for the piece to attach. And then I'm just going to make sure that this is perfectly smooth and just the way I like it. And then I'm going to look at these and try to get them to match each other in shape. And I'll even again butt them up against each other like that. And then what I'm going to do is now we're going to create his knee, and how I'm going to create his knee is I'm going to actually take the piece and put one finger behind it and actually bend it a little bit, and then take my thumb and forefinger and just create a line there, and it's going to be an exaggerated line, and we're going to just smooth that. Now right now we're doing all the rough finishing on this, and at the end of the piece I'll go back in and I'll refine everything. So right now I'm just trying to get it generally into the shape that I want, and I'm just trying to make sure that they match up in size, and then after I have the whole piece adhered, I will go back and I will add fine detail. And the reason we don't do that as we go along, unless we have to, like on the, on the toes, it's easy to do it because you're not going to mess those up. But in places where you're going to be working right next to it, you can spend all that time putting in all that fine detail, and then you end up knocking it out accidentally just by, touching the piece in the wrong place. Okay. So now he's got two legs that match like that, and what I've done is I've created a little wedge there, and that's going to be where his crotch goes. Okay. So now we're going to just attach these legs, and I'm just fitting them on there first to make sure I like the way they look, and like so, and then I just look at it and make sure they match up, and they do. Okay, now I'm going to come in with a rubber tip tool and my thumb, and I'm going to attach it all the way on the edge and also where it meets his foot. So let's start where it meets his foot, and we're going to just attach it real quick. And then we're going to come in all the way on the edge and roughly attach it. And if I can't get in there with my finger, that's when the rubber tool comes in handy. Okay. Now I'll come in with the rubber tool and do some finishing. Smooth it a little more, and what we're trying to do is eliminate that seam completely. I want to make it look like he is one with the background, and also that's really great because then I make sure that the piece is really well attached and I don't have to worry about it popping off as I'm doing stuff. Okay, so there you can see that leg is attached, and we'll do the same real quick on this guy. And I'm just trying, like I said, to eliminate any seams and get it looking like it's either rock or carved wood. So with a tiki, unlike an actual figure of a person, they don't have as many rounded points, and so you want to really try to make your shapes a little blockier, and in some cases have sharp angles, which in a human figure you don't do that. You want to try to make everything rounded and perfect, but on tikis, because a lot of them are carved out of wood or made out of ceramic, we want to mimic that in our piece. Okay, and so we leave all those edges sharp, and there we go. Now he's got a set of legs, and our next step is to join those two legs together. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take a ball of clay, and we're going to press our two thumbs. We're going to press two fingers on one side and our thumbs on the other side, and now we've created like sort of a triangle. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten that and round it, and now I have the shape of his crotch, and that's going to go in between to join those two legs. And I'm going to narrow this strip out because I really want to sort of make it almost invisible once I attach it. And so that's our shape, and now I'm going to attach that simply by laying it on top here, and I'm just going to press down, making sure that there's no air trap there, and also making sure that the piece really adheres very well to the background. And I'm not going to worry too much about smoothing this because I'm going to put other stuff on top of this. and so you're not going to really see it, and it's really well attached already. And as I'm going, I just take any marks that I don't like away. And you know, when you look at it, every time you look at it from a different angle, you see something that you missed. So now his crotch is attached, and the next step is going to be to create like a little chest and stomach for him. And in the case of this, it's not very big. It's a small piece because we're going to focus on his face. So I just started with a snake of clay, and I'm just trying to pull it out a little longer on the ends, and then leave that middle to have a little point in the middle, and I'll exaggerate that with my thumb and forefinger. Okay, now that's going to be his chest, and we're going to attach that the exact same way that we attached his crotch. This is kind of hard to do from this is backwards to the way I normally do, of course, to show you guys what I'm doing, so forgive me if this looks a little awkward at times because I'm so used to having it facing me, obviously. Okay. And again, we're not going to worry too much because I actually want that defined line. So I'm just making sure that it's really well attached, which it is. Okay, now our next step is to give him a little bit of a grass skirt to cover up his crotch because he's modest and he doesn't want to be hanging out. And so to do that, I just took a snake of clay, and now I'm going to put it on my cutting board. And you notice I'm using this glass cutting board which has all these little grids and rulers on it. This is actually for quilting, and it works really, really well for polymer clay. Okay, and I'm just pressing, 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 and once I have the entire piece pressed down, I will take my needle tool and I will just go and begin scoring. Now normally, when I'm doing this, I'm trying very, very hard to go slow so that I'm not making these little excess pieces of clay, but for our grass skirt, they actually look really good, and they kind of look like they belong. So I do this really quickly, as opposed to when I'm going to tell you to put any lines on the tiki, I'm going to tell you to go slowly because you don't want these. But for this, they're perfect because we're really mimicking the look of a grass skirt. You notice I'm going back on the edge to actually even pull out more. And if there's a lot on the surface, I'll wipe it away to make sure that we don't have anything that's going to break free once we put it on our piece. I'm just going over and over and over. And I probably don't need this much, but we'll go better to have more than to have not enough. Okay. That's more than enough. Okay, then I'll pick it up, and again just eliminate any little sort of pieces that aren't attached very well, and then make sure that I get them out of my way so that they don't get attached to my sculpture. Okay. Now I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to create a straight edge on both ends, and then I'm going to take this and starting on one side of his crotch, I'm going to, and you notice I'm giving it a slight curve to make it look as if it's his little hula skirt there. And then when I get to the other end, I'm going to take my X-Acto blade and I will trim it so that it's flush up against our piece. So now he's dressed and ready for the hula party. Okay. So now our next step for our guy is going to be to give him his mouth. And the mouth is super exaggerated in this tiki. I'm going to show you what it looks like on the finished piece. There it is. And it's a real simple shape to get. So I'm going to start with a sort of fat snake of clay. And again, the size of this is going to depend on how big you want his mouth to be. Notice that I don't ever really measure anything, and I just sort of let it go as it comes and see what I get. And if I don't like it, I can always make it bigger or smaller. So now what I'm doing is I'm pressing with my thumb and forefinger in the middle of our snake, like that. And then I am taking both my thumbs with the fingers underneath, and I'm flattening. And as I'm flattening, I am also rounding the two ends. And it's sort of going to look like a peanut. And if you look at it, you can see that mouth shape starting. So now it's up to you how thick you want his mouth to be. I don't want it to be too thick, but I also don't want it to be too thin. And the great thing about using our glass as a form is I'm going to then, when I apply this, I'm going to cut all the way through to the glass, and it's going to reveal the glass underneath so that when we fill this glass with a nice tropical drink, we will actually see it in his mouth, and also we'll actually see it in his eyes too until we drink down a little bit. And there is our mouth shape, real simple, not hard to get at all. And then I'm just making sure that I'm going to make these a little concave to really give depth, okay? And then I'm going to retrofit it by sticking it on here, and you'll see that's why I created that little spike going up, and that's where the center of his mouth is going to go. And I noticed that I don't think I have enough room here for his nose the way that I want, so I'm going to just make this a little more exaggerated in the middle, this little dip. And that way I'll be able to fit a decent sized nose there. Now I could also add a little bit more clay there and give myself a little more room. That's another way of fixing that problem. And so now I'm just adhering this, and then what I'm doing is I'm taking my thumb and I'm pressing down, and then I'm going to take my thumb and trace a line in the middle. But most important is to get this adhered. Now we're going to take our X-Acto knife, and you want to really make sure, one thing that you want to make sure with the X-Acto knife is that you're going straight up and down. You don't want to be at an angle for this, and you don't want to be only halfway through. We want to go all the way until we can feel the glass. And then once I have felt that glass, I'm going to slowly drag this. If you go too quick, you'll rip the clay, and we don't want that. We can always fix it, but it's just another step. And then I'm going to slowly take this around and go to the other side. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this as one big cut, you can also do it as multiple cuts. And you'll see, like, to make it easier, I just took the blade out, and now I'm going to put it right back in. And this is, the clay is very forgiving. It will be very easy to mend a mistake. And if you don't like what you get, you just pull this piece off and start over again. After all, it's only clay. Okay. Now I have the whole piece cut out, and I'm going to take my clay, my blade, and I'm going to actually pull up one of the ends and gently tug that out. And I didn't go all the way through easily in one thing here, so I have to pull out that excess, but that comes out real easy. And so now there's his little mouth, and now the next step is to fix all of these little marks that we made, and I'm not going to be able to easily do that facing the camera, so you're going to have to bear with me as I do it up facing towards me, because I won't be able to see what needs to be fixed. And this is again where this rubber tip tool comes in very handy, and I just threw it on the floor, and luckily I have my husband in here with me who just handed it back to me. So I'm trying to train the dog to do that, but he's not there yet. Okay. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my thumb and I'm actually drawing the edge of this down a little bit after I've smoothed it. And what that's going to do is give me a little more surface area for the teeth that I'm going to add on, or actually carve in, because we're not adding them on. And then I'm just going to do that all the way around. And our tiki is finally beginning to look like a tiki. And I just want to make sure that I have all smooth lines. I don't want there to be bumps where I don't want there to be bumps. So I'm going in there and I'm smoothing. Okay. Voila. Now our tiki is ready for action. He's getting there. He's got pretty much his whole body minus his arms, and he's about to have the rest of his face. So the face is actually pretty easy, and that's what we're going to do next. Our next step is to give our tiki his nose. The nose is going to fit in right here in between his two sides of his mouth there. So to make the nose, it's real simple. You're just going to take a ball of clay, and you're going to roll it between your two fingers and sort of round it out. And then what I do is I go and I actually take my thumb and forefinger and sort of make the point of his nose, and now I'm just brushing the sides down again to sort of flatten it. And we're going to have to retrofit this, because what I tend to do when I make these is I'll make 2 or 3 different noses that are different sizes, because sometimes we want a big nose and sometimes we want a small nose, and it really can change the character of the piece. So I'm going to make 2 different sizes to show you how it looks, and then we'll decide which one we're going to use. So there's the 2 different sizes. I think this one's probably going to be too big, but it might look really cool. So now I'm just going to take that and it's going to go there. And actually that does not look bad at all. So let's try that with a smaller size and see which one we like better. I think I'm going with the big nose. And so I'm just going to put that piece and attach it. And all I'm doing is pressing down. And I'm concerned with getting the very top of his nose sort of flush with the piece, and then I'm pressing down. I'm not worried about smoothing these, because these are going to be hidden in a second by the eyes. The eyes are going to go on either side of the nose. Now we haven't done his teeth yet, and we're going to leave, like I said, all those fine details until the end of our piece. And so here's his nose, and so now for his eyes I'm actually going to do these little flattened coin shapes. And how they were gotten is I just took a ball of clay and pressed it in between my finger and my thumb, and that gives us our eyes. And so see, now he's really shaping up and we can begin to see his character. And so now comes the tricky part, and that is, I want to give him his actual eye shape, and it's going to be a little hard for me to do it at an angle that you guys can see it. And actually I'm going to use Christie's tool for this, because I really like that for doing this one step, but that rubber tool will work as well. So what I'm doing is I'm taking this and I'm pushing it in at the corner of his eye where it meets the nose, and this is going to form his top lid. And I'm just sort of dragging it, and I'm going very, very slowly, and I'm curving it, and that looks good. And then I'm going to repeat the process to form the bottom of his eye, and I'm going to go like that. And I'm just going to get it real good and deep. It's kind of hard for me to do this at this angle and get it to look the way that I need it to look. So I'm going to just hold it up for a second. And that's what we're looking for. That's what we want to get. So I'm going to do that on the other eye. So now, again, same thing. I'm just going to start, in this case, because it's just easier because of the angle I'm at, I'm going to start, rather than starting by his nose, I'm going to start on the opposite side, and I'm just going to slowly drag that. And what I'm doing is I'm creating an angled space there that forms his little eye socket there. Okay. And if I go too quick, what ends up happening is the clay has like a raised look to it, and we don't want that. We want to eliminate that, because we want to make this look almost like it was carved. And so if that happens, all you need to do is just go back in with your finger and smooth that down. Alright, so now his eyes are in place, and now we need to take our X-Acto blade and we need to actually make it so that he can see. And trust me, he doesn't mind, he doesn't feel it, so he's not going to complain too much when I do this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, where that line meets, I'm going to take my X-Acto blade, and again, remember, go straight up and down, and I'm going to, again, slowly drag it to the opposite end, like that. Okay? And then now I'm going to go back in right where I started, but angled down now, and basically we're making a little sort of lozenge shape there, and you can see that it's pulled away, and these are a little tricky to get out, and basically what you want to do is sort of finagle it out a little bit like that. Ooh, now he can see. Now, you don't have to make both eyes match. I could make one eye really wide open, and I can just do a little line there to make it almost look like he's winking at us. Let's try to do that. So for that one, all I'm doing is creating one line in the middle, and then I'm going to go back and just make it a little bigger so that I cut out a slit. And then, now I could do it that you don't see any of the glass through there. And now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get that excess clay to come out, and the blade my finger can't get in there, but the blade can. And I'm just going to now go back in there and smooth. Now, when you do that, invariably what ends up happening is you end up leaving a tiny little bit that you don't want to leave, and that's where these rubber shapers come in so handy, because you can just smooth that little piece away. And I'm going to make him look like he's winking at us. Yeah, see, now he's done. Now, his eyes are done, and now his nose is in place, but we need to make that nose look more like a real nose. And so the next step, of course, is nostrils. And so those start with little balls of clay, and I sort of, made them match. And I'm going to roll those between my finger to get an oval shape like that. They almost look like teeny tiny little potatoes. And I just don't want them to have any little lines or wrinkles in them. Okay, now what I'm going to do to form his nostrils, I'm going to take my thumb and forefinger, squeeze one end, and curve at the same time, and that's one nostril. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to do it on the opposite side of this nostril, like that. And then now I have that shape. And now these fit perfectly in between there's like a little triangle there, and that's where they're going to lay on top of. And now he can smell the tropical land around him. Okay, all those pineapples and coconuts. Alright, so now our next step is I want to actually give his nose a little more interest, and that is where our etch and pearl is going to come in. And let me explain those a little better. And so for the next step on his nose, I actually want to create like a little extra detail on his nose. So I took a snake of clay and I tapered one end and I flattened it, and that has given me this piece. And I'm just going to set that aside. And then I'm going to take a little piece of scrap clay and I'm going to flatten it between my two fingers, and I'm going to adhere it pretty well to my cutting surface. And now here are etch and pearl. So now remember I pointed out to you when we first started that these have this little concave part here, and what that actually does is when you force clay in there, it creates a perfect little pearl. So I'm actually going to take it and I'm going to press it down all the way until I feel cutting board, and I'm going to go in a circular motion. And what that does, so it's great just to create a little hole in your clay. That's one use for this tool, and that's super handy. But if you notice, now what's left is all this clay that's perfectly in there. And what I'm going to then do is I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to again adhere it well so it doesn't move on me, and I'm going to push this down and gently press it in, and what you get is this really cool little pearl. And that's why they're called etch and pearl. And so they come in 3 sizes. So that's our first pearl. That's the large one. And now here's our medium pearl, like so. And then here is our small pearl. And you can see it gives a really cool little detail to our tiki, like that. And if I press down a little deep, you can see I actually get a really cool little line around it, and I like that. And so now this is just going to go right on the top of his nose, like so. And I'm going to very carefully press this down, not squishing my pearls. And so now it's like he's got this little cool carved detail. Now, he also kind of needs some eyebrows. And that's just to give him some attitude. And so to make eyebrows, I just took a snake of clay, and then what I did with the snake of clay is I pressed it in between my fingers and I squared it off. So how I'm doing that is I'm just taking my thumb and my forefinger and pressing, and then going around until I actually get a squared piece like that. Then I'm going to take my etch and pearl, and I'm just going to actually create a little line there, just to give a little added detail. And then we have to figure out how we want his eyebrows to go. And I think I want them to start at the base of his nose like that and come around like that. And I'm going to duplicate that on the other side. And now our guy is really beginning to shape up and looking a little fierce. And you can see as I've gone, I've messed this up, but I can very easily smooth it with my finger And I don't worry too much about that because we're going to add some texture at the end. And so I'm just trying to get rid of any dings that I did and any marks that I really don't want on there. But don't get too crazy about it because, again, it's supposed to look like a tiki and rustic, and having those little dings on there actually can look really good if you antique the piece afterwards. Okay, now let's talk about adding a little more detail on either side of his eyes. And so I decided I want him to have a little headdress, and that's, if you can notice on these. And so that's real easy. You just take a ball of clay and flatten it in between your thumb and forefinger, and then take your thumb and forefinger and make a point on one end, flatten it again, and then make a sharp line on the end. And it sort of looks like candy corn. And that's the general shape that we want. And we're going to need 6 of those. So through the magic of film here, we have 6 of them all ready to go. And you might have noticed on the finished piece that they also had etch and pearl, but I did an extra little treatment to them, and this is courtesy of Cindy Holt, who showed me how to do this. And it's a really cool use of these. So this is the medium of our etch and pearl, and again I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make sure it touches the cutting board and circle, circle, circle to make sure that I get a nice clean one. And I'll actually go in there and I'll make sure that it looks good on the bottom, and then I'm going to pop it down. Whoop. Sometimes they don't come out right away. Whoop. This one is not cooperating. No, let's try it again. I might not have enough clay in there. There we go. Alright, so that one's down. Then what I do is I take the small size and I very gently put it in, and what I end up getting is that little double circle. And that is our little feature. And I'm going to do that on all of these. It'll take me 2 seconds to do it, hopefully. Hopefully they'll cooperate a little more. I don't know why that first one didn't want to join the party, but for some reason it didn't want to come off. You can see that most times they come out real easy. And again, at home, I would hope that you're doing this a little slower than I am, so that you can be very precise. But because I want this video not to be 3 hours long, I'm going a little quicker than I normally would. Okay? So, then I go back in, and again, I'm just making a little dimple. And these are really good because it almost looks like a stone that's been set in a bezel. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my finger and tip it up a little bit. I'm going to do that to all of them. I just want them to have a little bit of an angle. I'm going to try not to smush my little pearls that I just made there, but I just want them to have a little bit of an angle to them. Okay, now to attach them, I'm going to start where his mouth meets his eye, and I'm just going to put one, and then one right next to it, and then another one right next to it. And it doesn't matter if they're all exactly the same shape. I kind of like the fact that some of them are slightly bigger and slightly smaller. And that's one side, and then we'll flip him over and we'll do the same exact thing on the other side. Now, other than not having any arms yet, our Tiki is really beginning to shape up. I'm really liking him. He looks good. And now, before we add any arms and such, let's do his teeth just to get it out of the way, because we're not going to really be messing around with that area. So I'm going to actually use the small etch and pearl for this. And this, the other thing that these are really, they're a really great needle tool because they're graduated. And so I'm going to actually, before I even start doing his teeth, I'm just going to give him a little mark here that delineates where the center of his chest is. Make him look a little more buff. A lot of Tikis work out, and he wants to be known as somebody who's, you know, working out as well as partying. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in. Now again, I'm going to do this slow. If I did this too quick, what would end up happening is the clay would rip as I'm going, and we don't want that. And we don't want the clay to really move very much at all. We want it to sort of create like a perfect sort of little line there. Now, one thing, if you are not comfortable doing this as one continuous line, you can sort of start in the middle and go as far as you're comfortable with, and then when it feels like you need to readjust the angle of your piece, you can just stop, and I'll show you how that looks. And you can see I'm going real slow, and the reason for that, like I said, is that we don't want the clay to move too much. And then I just start where I stopped, and I'm going to just come around that curve, and I'm trying to not get any excess clay on here. If I get any excess clay, I'll tend to just wipe it on my shirt or on my finger. We just want to make sure that we don't leave any sort of junk in that line. We want it to look pretty nice and smooth. And now I'm just going to come around to the center of his mouth. And you can see it's really beginning to look like his teeth are going to go in there. Now, rather than actually trying to continue around, I'm going to come down to the bottom here, and I'm going to actually go and meet that line. If it doesn't meet perfectly, we can fix it. Remember, with any of this stuff, if it doesn't look the way you want, just, pull that piece off and do it again. Okay, now he's ready to have some dental work done, and unlike real dental work, it's completely painless, and he doesn't mind, and he actually wants some nice teeth. So I'm going to start again. The nose gives me a really great place to start, because that lets me know that's sort of the center, and I'm just going in there and pressing a line in. And what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to see if I can show it to you. I'm actually making sure that this is not only making a line in the front where his teeth would be, but the top of his teeth as well, like that. And we want to make sure that that line is there. So I'm going to actually do that all the way around real quickly, and then he'll have teeth. Now, if it ends up moving the clay in a way that I don't like, I will come back in again with my needle tool and sort of smooth that out. But we're trying to make this look like it is carved out of wood, and so being that it would mimic a wood carving, these lines are not supposed to be absolutely perfect. We want it to really mimic the roughness of a wood. So a lot of tikis are very rough hewn and not very refined. Our guy is a little more refined, but not by much. Okay, now we're just about done with his teeth. Voila. Now again, if I hold this at different angles, I might see something I don't like, and if that's the case, just go back in there with your tool and smooth away whatever you don't like. It's easier to get rid of it now than after the piece is cured. Okay, he is all set. Now we have to start building his arms. So to give him arms, we need to make a shape that sort of looks almost like an amoeba kind of shape, or like that, maybe like an astrophy. And so to get that shape, I've just started with a ball of clay. I made it into an oval. I flatten it, and then I make a point. And there we go. Those are his arms. And once I have them, I just sort of try to make sure, oh, that one's a little bigger, so I maybe remove a little bit of clay and make them match up in size. And I don't really, the arms aren't really visible very much in this, so I'm not going to go nuts putting a lot of detail into them, because you're not really going to see them. And so this is considered his chest, this little area here. And so that would be right where one arm goes. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that that point is going towards his leg, because what I want to do is I'm going to attach the hand there. So I'm just flattening this down, and then I'm just using my finger to really press it down like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, like that. And then I'm going to take this tool and smooth it down. And next is going to be his hands. So to make our hands is actually pretty easy. We've made sure that the arms are attached and they're smoothed, and I'm going to actually go in and make that a little smoother, make that look the way I want. And now I've created a little spot here where his hand's going to go. And so for this figure, he's actually going to be doing two different things with his hand. If you look, one is giving you the thumbs up, and the other one has a nice frosty drink in it. And first, let's create the one that thumbs up, and that's this one. And so I'm going to show you how I get the hand shape. And how I get the hand shape is I start with a little ball of clay and I roll it between my hands. And again, notice that when I'm rolling, I'm just using my palm. And then I flatten it. And then once I have it flattened and it's sort of generally in the beginning of a hand shape, I take my thumb and forefinger and I press out an area that's going to be the thumb, and I'm actually just sitting here now and like separating that thumb out, and I'll take my finger and I'll crook it in there and actually make a little ridge, and that's going to be for this bend in his thumb. Now remember, again, like our toes, we want to make sure that we have thumbs going in opposite directions, and so there's his thumb. And then I take the piece and I pull out fingers like that. Now for this piece, I'm not going to actually separate the fingers because he's going to be holding his drink, and so we want to make maximum contact with his little drink. So here's his other hand, and before we put the finished detail on his hand, let's make that little drink. So the drink is in a coconut, and so I've rolled out, I'm going to make it a little smaller, I've rolled out a ball of clay, and to get our coconut shape, I'm just going to make that little ball of clay, and then I'm going to press it in between my thumb and forefinger to create a flat spot on the top, and then I'll actually take my finger and rotate the piece, and that's going to create our little dip in there. And I'm just going around and I'm pressing my thumb down, and what that's doing is it's creating a spot for our drink to go in. And then I'm actually going to take my rubber tip tool and actually go in there and make sure that that has a nice refined line. And then once that's done, now comes the time to add detail to our coconut, because we're going to wrap the hand around it, and so we can't add that detail after. We need to do it before, because we're not sure what's going to show once we attach it to the hand. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my small etch and pearl and I'm just sort of dragging it down. And again, this is not a case where we want to be extremely careful or precise with these lines, because if you've ever looked at a coconut, it has hair all over it, and we're mimicking that look. And so I'm just going up and down, and I'm making sure to wrap around to that bottom and give it a lot of little detail, and then I'll come back in and I'll smooth it down a little bit, but I'm really making sure that it's got a lot of little lines all over it. Okay, one coconut. Okay, now what do we need in a tropical drink? We need some fruit and we need a straw. So to make our fruit slice, I'm going to take a tiny little ball of clay and I'm going to flatten it, and then I'm going to go in with my finger and actually make a little wedge like that, and I'm just going to shape it so that it looks like a wedge of fruit that has been sliced to fit on the rim of our glass, our coconut there. And so then I'm going to take a needle tool. I'm going to clean off any excess clay on it, and I'm going to now make a little line along the edge, and that's going to be where the skin of our fruit is. And then I'm going to go in and do a little fine line and make a little triangle to make the sections of the fruit. And then to give it a lot more detail, I'm just going to go in and make tiny little dots, and that's mimicking the way that citrus fruit has those little dimples on the fruit. Okay, and now voila, we have a little slice of fruit on our drink, and now he's got to figure out how to get that into his mouth. And so for that we need a straw. And so I'm just taking a little snake of clay and I'm going to roll it in between my fingers like that, and then I'm going to actually flatten both ends by rotating it in my fingers and like that. And then I'm going to take a ball stylus tool and I'm going to actually go in and make it look as if this is an actual straw like that. See, now it's got a hole in the top. And then I'm going to attach this to my drink, and then I'm going to go back in with that rubber tip tool and really smush down the other end of our straw, because I really want to make sure that that does not come loose, and that piece is likely to come loose if you don't make sure it's well attached. Okay. Look at that. We have a little tropical drink for our Tiki guy. Now we just have to finish off his hands. Now, one thing that I like to do to get a really fine line on my pieces is I will use my X-Acto blade to add detail, but I don't use the actually sharp part. I'll flip it over so that the bottom of the blade is there, and I will actually use that to make his little fingernails and to give him little wrinkles on his knuckle. And then to remember, we got to just give him some more little sort of the hint of fingers. These fingers are wrapped around, but we're going to give him, you know, the hint of knuckles. So we just put little tiny lines there to be the knuckles. And that hand is done. Now this hand is a little trickier because we can see the fingers all the way through. So to differentiate, I'm going to actually use a needle tool to get these lines to be thicker, like that. And I'm making sure that I'm wrapping around to make it give the impression of separate fingers, even though I'm not really going to separate those fingers. And then what I'll do is I'll come back in with my finger and I will flatten that area. And that gives the effect that they're actually separate fingers, even though they're not. And then we're going to come in real quick and give them some nails, like so. Okay, he's just about done. Once we get these hands on, we just have a little more finishing work to do, and our Tiki is ready to be baked. So I'm giving him little wrinkles for his knuckles, and then we got to give him his little thumbnail. And I don't know how well this will show up on the camera, but you can see it actually really mimics a hand, and I'm actually going to also make sure I tilt his thumb up. Okay, now let's start by giving him the hand that's holding the drink. So I'm going to actually adhere this just by pressing the base of the hand, and I'm going to smooth, 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 like so. Now he's ready, and then I'm going to take my tropical drink and I'm going to stick it in his hand, and I'm going to press his hand around it and his thumb too, to really make sure that that drink is not going anywhere. And I might even actually press it so that the straw is touching a little bit like that to give it a little extra strength. Now, to finish this off, because I don't really like the way that his wrist looks there, I'm going to take a little ribbon of clay, a little snake of clay I should say, and give him a little bracelet. And that will add a little extra bulk to that area while also making it decorative. Okay. Now he's got his bracelet. Now let's go to his other hand. And he's giving the thumbs up because he's happy that he's got his little tropical drink and that he's going to be the star of this video. So I'm just attaching this, and again pressing, pressing, pressing to make sure it really attaches like that, and then we'll give him another bracelet. And to attach this, I'm just starting at one end of his wrist and then laying it flat and pressing it down, and again I want to really make sure that that's attached. So now our Tiki, at least the front of our Tiki mug, is pretty much done. We just have to do some final little extra detail, which I'll talk about in a minute, but let's talk about the back for a second. You could leave the back completely plain, but why not give the person who's using this drink a surprise? So two things. If you notice on this, this is what we're going to do to the back, but you'll also notice that the edge of this is really rough, and how I achieved that, because I want to make it look sort of like it's wood, is I've just taken my fingers and I've pressed the clay up at random spots, and that gives the look of sort of beat up wood. So now we rolled out a sheet on our thickest setting of our pasta machine, and I happen to have these little oval cutters. But if you don't have these oval cutters, you could do this shape by hand, or you could do it as two squares or whatever. And I'm going to make a small one and a big one. And then I happen to have this handy dandy little cutter, which is from a Primo set, that is a seashell. And I'm going to press that in. And then I'm going to remove my cutters like that. And pull out my little seashell, put away that. Okay, now I'm going to take my ball stylus tool, and I'm just going to go in my seashell, and I'm just going to make the little ridges that you would see in a seashell, like So there's the little ridges. And then I'm going to stack these one on top of the other. Center it so that it fits nice. And then the shell goes right in the middle like that. And then I'm just going to attach it. Now, how I figure out where the center of my back is I look at his nose and I follow that back, and then I go like that. And this is a lot easier to do when it's facing you, but you get the hint. Okay. There we go. So now we have 2 little steps left, and then our tiki is ready to be baked. So the next step is I take either my etch and pearl or a fine needle tool. I'll do it with the needle tool. And I'm just going to go and I'm going to make wood. I'm not going to do it to the whole thing because that would be really boring for you guys. You can see what it looks like on the finish, but I'm going to do a couple to show you some little tricks for it. And so you start at the top and you bring that line down and try not to make it straight. This is one of those rare times when you can be as wiggly as you would like. It actually looks a million times better if you do all these strange little wiggles. And you just want to make sure that when you get down to this base that you're actually making it wrap around. And then what I'll do is I'll come back in and I'll add little detail lines. Just look at bark if you don't know. And then sometimes I won't make the line go all the way down. I'll actually just do some little lines at the top or the bottom and maybe a random one. We just want to make it look like really old beat up wood. Now when you get to, it's up to you, on my piece I did not do it over the tiki, but I have in the past done that, and you would just go through and make lines on the tiki. But I'm not doing it for this, but for the back I did. And so just to show you, you would get to this point and you would just lift your blade a little, lift, tilt, and then keep going, and it makes it look as if the piece is aged wood. And so for our tiki, the only place that I'm going to do that on the front is right here, because that's a spot that shows through, and I'll do it, you know, up against his sides as well. And again, make sure you're doing it squiggly and make sure you're carrying it down to the little ridge on the base. Now if you get little extra pieces of clay there like I just did because I went a little quick, you can just remove them using your needle tool. So final things about our tiki. You're going to cure this guy at 275 degrees per quarter, a half hour per quarter inch. And so I would put this guy in for an hour. That would be what I would do with him. I would stick him in for an hour, and then let him cool completely, and then pull him out. I like, when I'm doing with glass, I like to leave the pieces, if possible, turn the oven off, leave the pieces in the oven to cool off. That way the glass doesn't have a chance of getting shocked. If you had a really cold house, you could potentially get a little crack in the glass. I've had it happen once in all the years that I've done this, and that trained me to then leave the piece in there just to cool completely. So one last final thing is, now this clay comes in gray, but you can mix Primo 50-50 with this clay. So this is Primo and it's burnt umber, and you can see you get a really great shape. Now for me, I always paint my tikis afterwards, and I use a really good quality acrylic. I actually use Citadel paints, which are actually for models, and they come in a variety of colors and different types, and they're great for working with polymer clay. Again, thank you Cindy Holt for that information. And but if you don't have those and you don't have access to those, I would recommend tube acrylics. Do not buy craft quality in the little plastic things in the craft store. It'll work, but you'll need to do multiple coats, so why not make it easier on yourself and just use better quality acrylics. And then what I would do to finish this completely is to glaze it with the Sculpey glaze, and that makes sure that the paint is completely on there and it's completely sealed, and it'll give it a really beautiful finish. I will have a bunch of photographs of finished ones for you guys. If you just search for Sherman Oberson, you'll find them, and they'll be on the Sculpey website as well. Well, thank you for joining me on making this tiki, and I hope you guys have a great day.